Good afternoon, Europe, and good morning, North America, and bonjour, Canada. I'm Roger Hilton, and welcome to this afternoon episode of Global Tremors. Ukraine's military success against Russia's invasion didn't happen by accident. It took years of hard work, discipline, and determination to perfect their craft through the help of foreign trainers. Live from Ottawa, Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake, Commanding Officer 2 Combat Engineer Regiment at the Canadian Armed Forces and Task Force Commander Rotation 11 of Operation UNIFIER, will share her experiences to review the CFA's mission in Lviv, how the training translated for Ukrainian success on the battlefield, and what Ukrainians need to do to prolong the fight and even win the fight against Russia. Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake, you're our first Canadian on Global Tremors, so welcome.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. As we normally start here, Lieutenant Colonel, we always start with a few news items. So for all of our viewers out there, a couple of updates to bring your way. As everybody knows, we're in day 2 of the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting where Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba met with NATO Secretary General and stated, "My agenda is very simple. It has only 3 items on it: weapons, weapons, and weapons." Ukraine's Deputy Economic Minister Taras Kachka has called for the unblocking of seaports to restore normal trade and supply routes, especially on the humanitarian level. On the energy front, the United Kingdom has announced plans for 8 new nuclear reactors to boost production. And today, the European Union envoys are set to approve a ban on Russian coal that would take full effect in mid-August. So, Lieutenant Colonel Lake, let's get right into it. Obviously, the upheaval of 2014 and the Maidan Revolution led to transformational change across Ukraine. Sadly, in addition to this democratic upheaval, there was the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in the Donbass, which fundamentally changed the security situation in Ukraine, where at the time, Ukrainian security forces weren't prepared or sufficiently able to defend themselves. Obviously, the international community has responded with this. So for all of our viewers who aren't familiar with it, let's start off. Can you please explain to us Operation UNIFIER from 2015 and how now it's been extended since to 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. So the creation of Operation UNIFIER was in direct response to the annexation of Crimea and the onset of the war in the Donbass. So this was, requested by Ukraine and Canada alongside the United Kingdom and United States and Lithuania, all deployed troops to commence training missions. So for Canada, we had initially about 200 people deployed to the International Peace and Security Center. That was in the west of the country, near Lviv, at Combat Training Center Yagorov. So the mission was initially focused on direct training, really kind of the things you would think of as almost your basic soldiers training, direct training on weapons and moving up to about battalion level. We also, in the early days of our mission, focused on engineer training and military police. But over the years, Operation UNIFIER has had to evolve quickly to stay relevant because the Ukrainian forces have been evolving and reforming at such a rapid rate. So by the time I arrived in March of 2021 on Rotation 11, we were really broadly focused and broadly distributed geographically. We were focused on individual training, so building sniper programs, recce programs, artillery training, engineer, medical, and military police training. Then also focusing on professional military education, so with people embedded in 7 different officer and non-commissioned officer academies. And finally on collective training. And we actually shifted our focus from Combat Training Center Yagorov in the west, where the American mission was firmly anchored, to CTC Cherokee Land, just north of Mykolaiv. So we became sort of the key partners helping to build that second combat training center. We were very much focused on a couple key efforts: facilitating NATO interoperability, and the path to that, enabling success and survivability in the JFO, and finally learning from our Ukrainian partners to make us better as a military.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for outlining that. And it's great to see all of the various programs and obviously the NATO interoperability. the big running joke right now is sort of NATO is ready to join Ukraine, which was one of the big issues. One quick follow-on question for you is from a theater perspective, if we're in 2014, you've outlined all of the different areas in which the Canadian Armed Forces and other partners have been working with Ukraine. Was there a specific element that Canadian trainers tried to install or refine among Ukrainians more than others, or was it more of a general comprehensive package?
I mean, I think it was very comprehensive, but we were very focused in all our lines of effort of no matter what training we were delivering, of trying to integrate the human elements. So that's really, building trust up and down the chain of command through leadership training, trying to institutionalize and build understanding of the concept of mission command, which is really fundamental in the way NATO operates. That's the idea that you conduct operations based on decentralized execution, harnessing the initiative of all your team members, exploiting the human elements, trust, initiative, force of will, judgment, and creativity, really empowering the people on your team to make quick and timely decisions based on an understanding of your intent. So it's telling people what you want them to achieve, not how you want them to do it. Then collaborative staff planning, really focusing on how NATO military units plan as a staff to enable that commander's decision making. Developing a professionalized senior NCO corps, senior non-commissioned officer corps, was also a really important part of our effort. And finally, that enduring piece from the very beginning of our training, combined arms training and combined arms integration, really working on how all of those maneuver and combat support and combat service support elements work together and cooperate. I did forget to mention in the first question that there was actually a second component of our mission as well that was led by the civilian side of our department, and that was focused on security sector reform at the strategic level. So looking at enabling the transition to civilian democratic control of the military and reforming the command and control structure to mirror the way NATO operates, and some of these very higher level initiatives at the Ministry of Defense that then supports the tactical level reforms that we were aiding.
Well, again, if you're just joining us here this afternoon edition of Global Tremors, we're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake of the CAF, Canadian Armed Forces, who's giving us the rundown on Operation UNIFIER, the Canadian training mission in Ukraine. Lieutenant Colonel, I want to pick up on three words you said. You mentioned the terms decentralization, creative, and empower, to empower your troops. There have been so many different videos, whether it's on CNN or across Twitter, of ambushes, of successful takedowns of anti-air force. Before moving to our next question, does the performance of the Ukrainian armed forces, with these three words, does it surprise you at all, considering that, with very limited equipment compared to Russia, that they've been so devastatingly effective in breaking up tank columns and other, sort of incoming air assets?
It doesn't surprise me at all. Ukraine has been refining this and their skills in the defense for the last 8 years with the war in the East, and they have done a really great job of incorporating all of the lessons, that those hard lessons that they've learned in blood in the Donbass, into how they operate. So between embracing the tactical lessons learned and working rapidly to ensure those make it back into their training system, and embracing mission command, empowering their senior NCOs, and really getting the right leaders in place. They were ready for this. Like this summer, back in August, there was a large change in the leadership of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it saw many very proven combat leaders who had immense respect and trust of the troops move into very senior positions, including the commander-in-chief, General Zaluzhny. He was so well regarded as commander of OC North, Operational Command North, and back from the early days of 2014 as someone who made good decisions on the battle space and was known for empowering their subordinates and taking the risks that came with that. So there was so much excitement as he took over the job. But moving down as well, like you look at the people who moved into the deputy position and those commanding some of the operational commands now, like Major General Nikoluk, who moved from the training center in Desna, where we had the privilege of working closely with him, to command of OC North and ran the defense of Chernihiv. This is someone, again, extremely proven in battle, designated as a hero of Ukraine from the early days of the war in the East. General Kovalchuk down in the south. Like there are many examples of this, but they got the right leaders in the right place at the right time. And that just, that starts this idea of empowerment all the way from the top, and it permeates down. And you're truly seeing the effect of that. Like you mentioned on the ground, these small teams that are having hugely disproportionate impacts on long columns of Russian armor.
Yeah, and Lieutenant Colonel, like, thank you for all of that. And let's stay on the word of empowerment just for one issue. Obviously, you said everything has really aligned in terms of leadership. The right people are in the places. And, compared to the Russian forces, the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces is very high, right? I mean, with every victory, with every piece of territory that they liberate, it just runs a little bit higher. An interesting question I have for you that sort of just come to mind is, obviously, in addition to the professional army that's, in Ukraine right now, you had a huge amount of civilians joining the territorial defense, average people from Europe coming back to Ukraine to do it. Do you think that sort of the Ukrainian soldiers who have been able to partake in Operation Unifier now have the communication skills to adequately prepare those who might not have any military background at all, and sort of actually making them be effective with whether it's an AK-47 or setting up a lookout spot?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as the mission went on, we went from direct training to train the trainers to really just standing back and monitoring and helping develop curriculum. So there's a ton of capacity within the force for delivering training in a very professional and skilled manner. There's no doubt about that. But this is also something, again, I don't want us to be looking to take credit for. Like they've been working very hard well prior to the onset of this latest invasion on building the system to be able to mobilize their whole of society, like looking at how do we stand up these territorial defense units? What's the command and control structure? They've been working on this and rehearsing it for a while and have had instituted exercises to exercise their national defense plan. So this is not necessarily a consequence of the NATO training missions. So much of this is good foresight and planning and rehearsals on the Ukrainian part.
Well, I mean, it goes without saying, we've mentioned a couple of those examples, like you said, that, there was a plan ready to go and they've activated it. And clearly it was something that was very underestimated from, the Russian military planners, Minister Shoigu, or from President Putin himself. Lieutenant Colonel, we've already established sort of the success they've had and the training. And, as you said, one of the best parts of this program that you've already mentioned is sort of the trainer part, and how you were just, supervising at this point, which really shows the quality of the first round of training they got. Now we're 43 days into this war. We've had some successful pockets where, Kiev and north of it have been liberated a little bit, but now the whole function or the battle landscape is shifting more towards the south and to the east. Before we got on air, we spoke a little bit about it where, my question was going to be about how much longer can they prolong this, but you might take a different point on it. So, I mean, as, we gear up for the next round of this intervention where fighting has already started in the east, what do the Ukrainian armed forces need to do to continue to be successful and ultimately win this war?
Mm-hmm. So I answer this very humbly, as I certainly don't presume to be in a position to tell them what they should be doing. I think they have shown everybody that they are very capable of making good decisions at the tactical, operational, strategic, and political level in this. I believe that the aim for them is not a prolonged fight at this point. Like when you consider that the impact and the cost every day of fighting, and every inch of terrain that is contested, the cost is huge. And at the start of this conflict, and to go back to that, the path to peace really has to be through victory. At the start of the conflict, I think prolonging the fight and living to fight another day was very much what many analysts were hoping for. In the first week alone, I think a lot of people woke up every day surprised, and I would say a lot of people who weren't familiar with Ukraine and the Ukrainian forces, they woke up every day surprised that the Ukrainian flag was still flying over Kyiv. But over the last 40 to 43 days, Ukraine has shown that its goal and its capability is not just to stay in this fight, but to win. When you talk about what's important to do to be able to do that, I think it's incredibly important that they maintain the moral high ground. And no doubt, in the face of the atrocities that we're seeing, the atrocities that are being committed against their own people, and the viciousness and cruelty of the fighting, emotions can run very high, and that can be hard, but it's an area where you simply can't afford to waver. And that, maintaining that moral high ground and that professional conduct and that adherence strictly to the laws of armed conflict, that allows you to keep the complete and absolute support of the entire free world. I think they need to continue exactly what they're doing in terms of communicating their needs to the international community, showing clearly the impacts of this war in the heart of Europe in 2022, and ensuring that none of us can look away. And we need to, keep those supplies coming, ensure that we can continue to enable them in this fight, and that we're thinking about what that day looks like, the day after this war ends, and ensuring that we're ready for that next phase. That's my thoughts.
No, I mean, it's obviously, like you said, I mean, it's super important to be keeping the moral high ground. And if you're just joining us on Global Tremors, we're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Melanie Lake of the Canadian Armed Forces, explaining the Canadian training mission in Lviv. Lieutenant Colonel, you've established the importance of keeping the moral high ground. In our earlier episode today, we talked about how the UN's going to have a vote today on suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council, and all of the other issues that come with being positive. The next question I wanted to ask you is, General Milley, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that this conflict could theoretically last for years, and that would profit Russia. From a soldier standpoint and a physical standpoint, do you think that the Ukrainian armed forces have the endurance to go on this long, not on a morale level, but physically having to live in the trenches and work these unbelievably tough hours? And we're entering summer, but if it were to go on, winter is not so far away either.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that, this takes an immense toll on soldiers, but it takes an immense toll on soldiers on both sides. And there's a very big difference in the way soldiers on each side of this fight are being treated. And that has a huge impact. When you look at the Ukrainians, they are fighting amongst their people. They have the support of the entire population. The entire population is playing a role in ensuring that their logistics needs are met, that they feel that support, that the population and the international community is doing everything they can to support them. Russia doesn't have that. In fact, they have the exact opposite. Like, Ukrainian civilians and those who have risen up as part of the Territorial Defense Force are trying to make every step they take more difficult, and trying to, they already had terribly planned supply lines, and Ukrainian civilians are just making that more and more difficult by targeting these soft supply chains that are coming behind it. So I think that that is certainly something that affects both sides, but I think Ukraine is in a much better position to absorb and withstand those pressures. You also think, when you look at their supply lines, Ukraine can use those internal supply lines to reinforce. They especially as we look at a shift of the conflict to the east, Ukraine is able to leverage much quicker resupply lines, whereas Russia has to rely on those external supply lines. You also have to factor in, the morale of the soldiers and that will to fight. That the importance of that just can't be understated. Your commitment to the fight under hard conditions, is certainly enhanced when you know your family is behind you and your friends are behind you and you're fighting for your own country, and you believe in it and you understand what you're doing there. When you don't have that on the Russian side and you don't understand what you're doing there, and you've already spent 6 months in terrible conditions, sitting, waiting, not knowing why. You've already been away from your family for ages and ages, and you're treated terribly by your chain of command. You've probably been abused in the process of coming up through your training. You're not given any information. You're not empowered. It's going to play a huge difference in the long game.
Well, I mean, Lieutenant Colonel, like you couldn't have hit the head on the nail more. I mean, you have two diametrically opposite situations where, like you said, I mean, that the Ukrainian armed forces in these very tough situations, they're really sort of harnessing the energy of the population. And to see these videos of restaurants currying back and forth supplies, bringing them tea, bringing them blankets, it really plays a big role on the mental side. And then just over the border in Russia, I mean, you've had President Putin who's had to initiate a conscription to have more troops been brought in. And then there's been stories of sort of revolts on the battlefield about, conscript soldiers breaking the legs of their commanders and, not wanting to fight, not understanding why it's there. So, I mean, amidst all of this darkness, Lieutenant Colonel, it's great to hear that you're so optimistic, that you're not overconfident, but that under the right circumstances, Ukraine can win the war. Lieutenant Colonel, we're entering the last part of our interview here. So just, you're coming to us live from Ottawa. As we sign off here on Global Tremors, do you have any last remarks or something that our viewers should be on the lookout for as the battle shifts or on the political level in terms of supporting Ukraine?
I think, we all have to remain focused on this. We all have to see what's happening there and not turn our eyes away from the human costs this is taking. For all of us, I mean, this has to be forefront in our minds. We're seeing this unfold in 2022 in Europe. It's hard to put into words the atrocities that we're seeing. And that's just what we're seeing. We don't even have visibility on what's happening in places like Mariupol, where, one of the most there's a very deliberate tactic to ensure that journalists can't get in, that word can't get out. So I'm terrified to see what's going to be exposed as more and more terrain is retaken. I think we all need to remember that they are fighting on the front line of democracy for all of us, mm-hmm. and we all have a part in this, and we all will be affected by the outcome.
I mean, it's very somber words. I mean, obviously seeing the images out of Bucha and Irpin, it's very tough. But I mean, the most important thing, as the general prosecutor of Ukraine said yesterday, speaking on CNN's Christian Amanpour, is that, we won't forget this. This is an issue of getting back to it. And while, we're still in the doldrums right now of the physical conflict, countries like Canada have called for a special rights committee or tribunal on human rights. So, I mean, this is far from over. So, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for taking, a little bit of time out of your very busy schedule. Thank you so much for your efforts, training the forces over in Ukraine. And, as we always say here, most importantly, Slava Ukraina. And we look forward to speaking with you and somebody else from Canada again. So to all of our viewers, thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you.